The sky was dark and silent with no stars above the wasteland. A broken chapel stood alone in the dust. Its walls were cracked, and its windows were gone. Only the wind moved through the empty building. Inside, a man knelt on the floor. He wore a long, black robe and held a strange old book in his hands. He whispered words that no machine could understand. His name was Father Elias. He was a human priest, the last one left. Far above him, a small alien drone watched from the sky inside a floating ship. A young alien girl named RVEL looked at the screen. Her green eyes narrowed as she listened, but her translator chip gave no meaning. The human priest was speaking in a language the aliens had deleted from their records. She tried to adjust the audio, but it only came out as noise. She looked around the control room, but no one else seemed interested. To them, it was just another human doing strange things in the ruins, but to Arvel, it felt different. There was something about the way he moved, slow and calm, like he knew something powerful, like he was not afraid of being watched. Suddenly, the lights in the control room flickered. One of the techs shouted that there was interference from the surface. Arvel turned back to the screen. The priest had raised his hands and a red glow had appeared behind him. A symbol of light hovered in the air above the old altar. It was not any symbol in the alien archives. The text tried to cut the feed, but the drone went offline. The screen turned to static. Arvel felt a chill down her spine. She stared at the blank screen. She had to see him for herself later. That night, she took a scout ship and flew alone to the wasteland. She landed far from the chapel and walked through the dust. The air was cold and dry. Her boots made soft sounds on the ground. She reached the chapel and looked through a crack in the wall. Father Elias was still there. He was still kneeling, still praying. A soft light surrounded him. It looked warm. It looked alive. She stepped closer without thinking, but then he spoke without turning his head. He said, "You do not belong here, child." She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. How did he know she was there? She had not made a sound. Her cloaking device was still on. He turned slowly. His face was kind but strong. His eyes were dark like deep water. He looked at her like he could see through everything, even her thoughts. Arvel stepped back. She reached for her communicator, but it crackled with static. No signal, no connection. "No, escape," he said. "You are not the first to come, but you might be the first to listen." She asked who he was. He smiled and said, "I am nothing. Only a voice from the past, a shadow of hope, a whisper in the dark." She asked what he was doing. He said, "I speak to the one who made all things, the one your kind forgot, the one you fear." Without knowing why, she asked what the red light was. He said, "It is not light, it is truth." Arvel felt her legs shake. She wanted to run, but her feet stayed still. She had never felt fear like this, not fear of danger, but fear of something greater than herself, something bigger than her world, something she could not control or measure or explain. Father Elias stood up slowly. He walked toward her, but not with anger, with peace. He said, "You came to see the monster, but found a mirror instead." She did not understand. She could not yet. Suddenly the ground shook. Far in the distance, a ship was coming. Other aliens, other soldiers. They had tracked her signal. Elias looked up at the sky. He said, "They will come. They will try to stop what has already begun. But truth is not a fire you can put out. It is the wind. It is the ocean. It is the end of lies." Arvel looked at him. She did not know what to believe, but she knew one thing. This human was not weak. He was not broken. He was not lost. He was dangerous, but not in the way her people had told her. She whispered, "What are you?" He looked at her and said, "I am the prayer they forgot to erase." And behind him, the red light grew stronger too. Be continued. Arvel stood frozen in the cold wind as the red light behind the priest kept glowing like a pulse from another world. Her heart beat faster with every breath as she watched Father Elias turn away and return to the center of the ruined chapel. She wanted to leave, but her legs refused to move. There was no signal on her device, no backup, no escape plan. Only the voice of the human priest echoing in her mind like a song she never heard before. Elias walked slowly across the cracked floor as if he could feel the ground speaking to him. He opened his strange old book and placed it on the altar. The wind outside began to swirl around the broken windows like it too had come to listen. Arvel took one careful step forward, then another. Then another. She passed through the ruined doorway and stepped inside the chapel. Elias did not turn. He kept whispering those same strange words that caused her translator to buzz with confusion. The air felt heavy like a memory trapped in stone. She looked around and saw strange marks on the wall's old drawings. Symbols that matched nothing in her people's archives, but they felt familiar in a way she could not explain. Her hand moved toward one of the symbols the moment her fingers touched. A sharp heat ran through her arm like lightning in her veins. Elias said quietly, "They burned our books, they broke our temples. But they never silenced the truth. It lives in stone, in blood, in memory." Arvel stepped back and looked at her hand. No wound. No burn, no injury, but something had changed inside her. She could feel it. She asked him how he knew she was watching. He replied with a calm voice, "Because the truth always calls the seeker even when the seeker does not know they are seeking." She asked what the words in his book meant. He answered without looking at her, "They are not just words, they are keys. Each one opens a door in the soul." Arvel looked down at the book, but she could not read it. The letters moved like shadows in water. She wanted to understand, but the more she stared, the more her head began to ache. Suddenly, Elias closed the book and turned to face her. He said, "You are curious. That is good. Curiosity is the first sign of hunger, and your people have starved for far too long." She asked him what he meant. He said, "Your kind has eaten metal and breathed fire. You have touched stars but forgotten spirit. You control skies but cannot understand peace. You are rich in power and poor in soul." Arvel felt her anger rise, but she kept quiet. She was not here to argue. She was here to learn, or maybe to witness. She was not sure anymore. Outside, the wind grew louder. The alien soldiers were close. Elias turned toward the doorway and whispered a soft line from his book. The sound of the wind vanished. The air turned still. Even time seemed to pause. He looked at her and said, "Do you want to see more?" She nodded slowly without speaking. He walked to the center of the chapel and raised his hand. The floor beneath them began to shine. With a soft white glow, the stones moved apart, revealing a spiral path going down into the earth. Arvel hesitated, but Elias had already started walking down. She followed him into the darkness. The walls of the passage were covered in carving stories of pain, of joy, of loss, of hope. Each one felt like it was alive. They reached a chamber below filled with hundreds of candles. No wind, no machines, no tech, only light and silence. Elias said, "This is where the last faithful came before they were taken. They sang songs your kind cannot hear. They held hands and wept, but they never begged, they never surrendered." Arvel walked slowly around the room. Her eyes caught a small statue of a woman with tears carved into her face. She asked who it was. Elias said, "That is faith. She waits for all who return." Arvel sat down on a stone bench. She felt tired, not from walking, but from everything she had seen. She felt like a mirror that had cracked, but had not yet shattered. Elias sat beside her and said, "You came with eyes to watch, but you found a heart that feels. That is how truth begins." She looked at him and asked why he stayed, why he prayed alone, why he waited. He smiled and said, "Because I was told one would come not to kill, not to arrest, but to listen. And now you are here above them." The alien ship hovered, but could not detect anything below. The silence was too deep. The signal was too lost. In that moment, a priest and an alien girl sat together in the dark, with only candlelight between them. The morning sky was cold and gray as three alien ships hovered over the broken wasteland. Dust blew across the silent ground while the red glow from the chapel still lingered in the air. Inside the command ship, Commander Drex paced back and forth. While watching the monitor with a sharp stare, his mission was simple: capture the human priest and bring him back for questioning, alive if possible, dead if needed. His soldiers were trained in mind control, weapons, and emotion suppression drills. They had handled riots, explosions, assassinations, and even wild alien beasts, but Drex had never faced a human like this before. He called it superstition, he called it resistance, but deep inside a small part of him felt something different. He just didn't want to say it out loud. Arvel stood at the back of the command ship, quietly watching the screen. She had returned to report her findings, but she said nothing about the underground chamber, nothing about the strange statue, nothing about the feeling she could not explain. Commander Drex looked at her and said, "You saw him. Tell me what he did." She paused and replied with a flat voice, "He prayed, he spoke old words, he carried no weapon." Drex laughed and said, "Then this will be easy." The dropship door opened and three elite enforcers stepped out. They wore thick armor with glowing blue masks. Each one carried a pulse cannon on one arm and a shock spear in the other. They moved like shadows through the wind, heading straight for the chapel inside. The chapel Father Elias stood still by the altar. His book was closed. His eyes were calm. He looked up at the broken roof as if he knew they were coming. The red light behind him faded. Slowly, like a sunset in slow motion, the first enforcer entered the doorway and pointed his weapon. He shouted for Elias to get on the ground. No answer. The second one moved to flank the priest from the side. He activated a neural net to trap human brain signals. No effect. The third one raised the shock spear and stepped closer. Elias looked at him and said one word, remember. Suddenly, all three enforcers froze. Their masks glitched with static. Their bodies shook like something inside them had been touched by invisible fire. Arvel watched the live feed from the ship. She saw their heart rate spike. She saw the neural scans overload. Then she saw something no machine could explain. All three enforcers dropped their weapons and fell to their knees. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. Their eyes looked wide with fear. They were not looking at Elias. They were looking at something around him, something they saw, but no one else could. The feed cut to black. All communication with the ground team was lost. Commander Drex shouted at the text to restore signal. No response. All channels dead. Arvel whispered. He warned you. Drex turned to her with anger in his voice. What is he? A weapon? A mutant? A god? She said nothing because she did not know, because maybe he was something else. Something older than their science, something deeper than their control. On the ground, the wind blew softly again. The chapel stood unharmed. Inside, Father Elias sat down on a wooden bench and closed his eyes. The three enforcers lay on the ground, breathing slowly, but they were no longer the same. Their minds were touched, not broken, but changed. One of them whispered a word in an ancient human tongue. A word Arvel heard in her dream after touching the book. The word meant peace, but it also meant storming the ship. Commander Drex prepared a larger team. He wanted tanks, he wanted drones, he wanted fire. But Arvel stepped in front of the door and said, you send more, you lose more. Drex raised his hand to push her aside, but before he could speak, a loud sound echoed from the sky. Not thunder, not engines, but a voice. It came from no speaker. It came from the sky itself. One word spoken in silence. Enough. Everyone on the ship froze. The sound was not heard with ears. It was felt in the chest, like truth breaking into bones. Drex looked at the screen and saw a new symbol glowing above the chapel. It was not human, not alien, just light in the shape of a circle with no beginning and no end. He stepped back with fear in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he did not know what to do. Arvel looked at the sky and whispered, he is not fighting, he is reminding. And far below, the priest sat still as if waiting for someone or something to arrive. The sun barely rose above the wasteland as the night faded slowly into a pale blue morning. Arvel wandered near the broken chapel alone and silent as thoughts crashed inside her mind like waves against stone. She had not slept. The memory of what happened to the soldiers haunted her eyes. Every time she blinked, three enforcers left the ship as machines and came back as empty men who spoke in riddles and wept in silence. No weapon could explain their terror. No science could solve what the priest had done. She waited in the shadows as Father Elias swept the chapel floor. With a quiet patience, he moved like someone who had all the time in the universe, each motion slow and steady, as if brushing away more than just dust. The red light from before had faded, but the air still felt heavy. She wanted answers. She wanted to see what he was hiding. When Elias finished sweeping, he left his old book on the altar and stepped outside to gather broken pieces of wood. The moment he left, Arvel slipped into the chapel. She crossed the cracked floor quickly and stood before the strange old book. It looked simple, leather worn by years of touch, pages yellowed by sunlight and secrets. She hesitated for a breath, then reached out her hand and placed her palm on the cover. A wave of heat exploded through her skin. Her vision turned white. Her body froze as a river of voices crashed into her thoughts. She saw crowds of humans kneeling together in endless fields. She heard songs without music and prayers without words. Millions of voices speaking one thought, one hope, one name. Not Elias, not any name she knew, but a name that sounded like home and storm and peace at the same time. The light was golden and endless. She felt tears on her face, not her own, but of thousands who had cried before her. She saw fire raining from alien ships. She saw temples burning. She saw a woman holding a child in the darkness and whispering a word she could not translate. The voices grew louder. She tried to let go, but her hand would not move. The chapel disappeared. The world vanished. There was only light and memory and loss. She felt the pain of every human who ever begged for hope. She felt the courage of those who stood alone. She felt the rage of those who lost everything but faith. A single voice rose above the rest. It whispered, You cannot erase what lives inside the soul. The vision broke. Arvel collapsed onto the cold floor, gasping for breath. Her heart raced as sweat dripped down her brow. She crawled backward away from the altar, her whole body shaking. Elias entered and knelt beside her. He did not touch her. He waited. As she tried to breathe, the pain faded, the voices faded, only the memory stayed. When Arvel opened her eyes, she saw the priest looking at her with sadness and strength. He asked if she saw. She nodded. Her voice was a whisper. "What is it?" Elias said. "It is the memory of every prayer, the story of every soul. It cannot be hidden. It cannot be erased. No machine can translate it. No law can break it." She asked why it hurt so much. He answered, "Truth always hurts when you have lived in lies, but pain is the first sign of healing." Arvel stared at the book. She was afraid to touch it again, but she wanted more. She wanted to understand. Elias said, "Your people fear what they cannot control. That is why they fear faith. That is why they fear hope. But hope is not a weapon. It is a fire that spreads in silence." She asked what happened to the soldiers. Elias replied, "They saw what you saw. Some saw fear, some saw peace, some saw both, but none saw nothing outside." The wind carried the sound of distant engines. Alien ships circled like hungry birds waiting to strike. Inside the chapel, only silence and two living beings remained. Arvel asked why he stayed if he knew he would be hunted. Elias smiled, "Because faith is not safe. It is not for the strong or the powerful. It is for the lost, the broken, the forgotten." He said, "I stay because one heart awake is stronger than 1,000 asleep." She felt tears in her eyes. She did not understand why she was not human. But the memory inside the book was now inside here. A shadow passed across the window. Soldiers were gathering outside. Elias looked at Arvel and spoke. "If you wish to leave, leave now. If you wish to know more, stay." She looked at the open door. She looked at the book. She looked at her own hands. For the first time she felt a choice. The golden light from her vision flickered in her memory. She did not run. To be continued. A heavy cloud rolled over the wasteland while the ships above moved in slow circles like silent hunters looking for prey inside the command ship. Commander Drex spoke in low, angry words to his council of leaders. He demanded answers, and the only answer was fear. Soldiers refused to return to the surface. Techs refused to scan the chapel again. Something in the last transmission still haunted the whole crew. The three broken enforcers had not spoken since they were carried back. Each one stared into the air and whispered the same word, "Enough." Drex ordered the council to send their last weapon, the Mind Killer, an assassin trained to break human will and erase all memory. His name was Norax. He had never failed. The Mind Killer walked alone across the dust with cold blue eyes and a mask covering his face. He carried no weapon. His power was in his mind. He stepped into the ruined chapel as Arvel watched from behind a broken pillar. Father Elias stood with his back to the assassin, reading quietly from his old book. Norax reached out with his mind. Invisible waves of fear poured through the air. Any human should have fallen to their knees. Any normal soul would beg for mercy, but Elias did not move. And Norax spoke with his thoughts. His voice echoed inside the priest's skull. He showed Elias visions of fire and darkness. He showed him death and emptiness. He tried to tear open the priest's soul and find weakness, but all he found was calm. All he found was light. Elias whispered softly, but his voice filled the whole chapel. He said, "I have walked through fire. I have seen the end of worlds. Your fear is not my fear." Norax's power grew stronger. The air thickened. The light faded. Arvel felt the terror touch her mind. Her knees buckled, and her breath grew thin. She tried to look away, but could not. Elias closed his eyes and said one word, "Peace." In that moment, the room filled with golden light. The assassin staggered as memories flooded his thoughts. He saw his own mother's face. He saw himself as a child running through fields. He saw laughter and love and hope. The more he tried to fight it, the more he saw. His power crumbled under the weight of his own forgotten heart. Tears streamed from his eyes as he dropped to his knees. He wept like a lost child and whispered, "Forgive me." Elias walked to Norax and placed a gentle hand on his head. He said, "You are not a weapon. You are a soul. Remember who you are." Arvel watched in shock. She had never seen an assassin break. She had never seen a priest win without violence. Her heart pounded as the Mind Killer wept on the chapel floor. Commander Drex screamed through the cum. He demanded Norax kill the priest. He demanded fire and blood, but Norax only wept. Drex smashed his fist against the control panel. No order could reach the assassin. No threat could touch the priest outside the chapel. The soldiers hesitated, none wanted to enter. None wanted to face what was inside. Some whispered that the priest was a demon, others said he was a god. Arvel knew he was neither. He was just a human with a power her people could not explain. A power they feared more than any weapon, a power born from faith. Elias looked at Arvel and spoke softly. He said, "Fear makes slaves, hope makes warriors. Which one are you?" She did not answer. Her mind spun with questions she could not ask. Her eyes burned with the golden memory from the book. She watched as Elias helped Norax to his feet. The assassin looked at him with new eyes filled with pain, but also with light. He turned and left the chapel. He did not look back. Commander Drex saw Norax return to the ship alone. He saw the tears on his face. He felt something break inside himself. For the first time, Drex wondered if the stories were true, if the old human faith was more than myth, if one priest could change everything inside the chapel. Elias sat down beside Arvel. He opened the old book and read silently. No words left his lips, but Arvel heard the prayers in her heart. The world outside waited for war, but inside the chapel something else had begun, something stronger than any weapon, something more dangerous than any assassin. A memory, a hope, a truth. Asterisk. The sky was dark with thunder as the alien ships gathered above the ruins, ready for the final assault. Commander Drex stood in the center of the command room with his eyes cold and his jaw set with anger. No more warnings, no more patience. He ordered every weapon prepared and every soldier ready to march. Today the human priest would fall. No one could explain the failure of the mind killer. No one could understand why the enforcers still sat in silence, whispering words no alien could translate. Some soldiers refused to go down to the surface. Some prayed to the stars for strength. Drex shouted over the comms that there was no room for weakness. He called for Arvel to join him. She walked into the command room with her mind heavy and her heart confused. She had seen what no other alien had seen. She had touched the book and survived. She had felt hope. She had felt fear. She did not know which feeling was stronger. Drex ordered her to lead the first attack squad into the chapel. She wanted to say no, but her voice would not work. She took her helmet and followed the soldiers out of the ship. The wind whipped across the broken ground as the squad moved in single file toward the chapel. Inside the ruined walls, Father Elias sat on the cold floor with his hands folded and his eyes closed. He did not move. He did not hide. He waited. As the doors burst open, the squad surrounded him with their weapons drawn. Drex's voice echoed through their headsets. No mercy, no surrender. Arvel stood at the front with her weapon pointed at Elias. Her hands shook. She saw the golden memory behind her eyes. She heard the prayers in her chest. Elias looked at her and spoke. "You must choose." Arvel felt tears rise in her eyes. Her whole life she had been taught that humans were weak and faith was poison. Her whole life she had trusted the wisdom of her commanders, but now she saw only fear in their eyes. She saw only strength in Elias. Drex gave the order. Fire. Arvel dropped her weapon and stepped between Elias and the squad. Her voice was soft but clear. "You want him. You come through me." The squad hesitated. They looked at Drex's face on the cum. He screamed at them to fire. No one moved. Elias stood up and placed a gentle hand on Arvel's shoulder. He said, "You are not alone." The world outside the chapel seemed to go silent. The soldiers lowered their weapons. One by one they backed away. Drex roared in anger and sent more troops. He ordered drones and tanks to destroy the chapel, but nothing could break through the walls. Missiles exploded in the air. Lasers turned to sparks inside the chapel. Nothing changed. Drex cursed Arvel's name and called her a traitor. He broadcast her betrayal across the fleet. He demanded that every loyal alien turn against her. But some soldiers lowered their weapons. Some looked at the ground. Some whispered the word they had heard from the enforcers. Enough. Arvel looked at Elias and asked if she was wrong. He smiled and said, "To choose hope is never wrong." She realized she was crying. Her tears fell on the cold floor. Elias took her hand and placed it on the old book. This time there was no pain, only warmth, only light, only peace. Outside the storm raged and Drex screamed. Inside the chapel, a new sound began, a quiet song, the sound of voices joining together, human and alien, soldier and traitor, all singing without fear, all singing without hate. Elias closed his eyes and whispered, "One heart awake is all it takes." The song grew louder. It echoed through the ruins. It reached the soldiers waiting in the dark. Some dropped their weapons, some joined the song, some fell to their knees and prayed in words they did not understand. Arvel looked at the faces around her. She saw fear fading, she saw hope rising, she saw the end of old lies and the beginning of something new. Drex saw his army falling apart. He ordered one last attack, but his voice was lost in the music. He watched as the chapel glowed with a golden light. He saw Elias and Arvel standing together. He saw his own soldiers refuse to fight on that day in the ruins of a broken world. One alien girl chose hope, one human priest chose forgiveness, and together they changed everything. Darkness fell across the wasteland as the storm clouds parted, and the golden light from the chapel shone like a beacon for miles on the alien ships. The command centers were silent except for the whispers that echoed through every hall. Commander Drex sat alone in his chair, watching old screens flicker with static as his army ignored his orders and listened for a song only some could hear. The rebellion had begun in silence. It grew from fear and ended with hope. Alien officers huddled together in corners, afraid to speak the priest's name aloud. They called him the Nightmare in secret. They called him the Destroyer of Control. Some called him the Echo of the Old World. All of them wondered what he really was. No one dared to enter the chapel again. No one dared to break the peace that had settled like a blanket over the ruins. In the chapel, Arvel knelt beside Father Elias as he finished his last prayer for the night. The candles flickered with soft light as other aliens joined them in silent circles. They did not know the words, they did not know the meaning, but the music of hope filled the air. Elias stood and placed his book on the altar one last time. He looked at Arvel and smiled with pride and gratitude. She had chosen the side of hope. She had chosen to stand for truth. Her people could never go back to how things were before. The golden light that filled the chapel was no weapon. It was a promise. It was a new beginning. Arvel knew her life would never be the same. She would be hunted by her own people. She would be a traitor to her kind, but she would never regret her choice. On distant alien worlds, parents told their children stories in the dark. They warned them not to speak the name Elias. They told them that hope was dangerous. They said the nightmare would come for those who tried to crush faith. Some children listened and grew afraid. Some listened and grew curious. A rumor started to grow in the cities of the stars. Aliens who felt lost began to whisper. Aliens who felt alone began to search for the golden light. Soldiers laid down their weapons in secret and wondered if the nightmare could bring them peace. Drex's fleet was breaking apart. Some ships left without orders and drifted into the void. Others sent messages begging for answers. No one could explain why the power of one human priest had changed everything. No one could understand how one alien girl had changed the course of history. Drex sent his last message to the Council of Elders begging for help. No one replied. He threw his cum on the ground and screamed at the empty room. He was alone. He had lost his army. He had lost his power. He had lost the war. Without a battle far below in the chapel, Elias gathered the last group of followers around him. He told them his story. He told them that fear had no power in the light. He told them that hope could never be erased. He placed his book in Arvel's hands and told her to keep the memory alive she promised. With tears in her eyes, the light around them faded, but the peace did not leave. Elias walked to the chapel door and looked at the sky. He knew the world was watching. He knew his work was done. That night, Father Elias left the chapel alone. No one saw where he went. No one followed. Arvel waited for days. She searched for signs, but found only silence. She was not afraid. She knew the priest would never truly be gone. He had left his truth behind. He had left hope in every heart that listened. Years passed, and the story of the nightmare became legend. Some said Elias walked among the stars. Some said he lived in the hearts of those who chose hope. On every alien world, the council banned his name. They searched for Arvel, but never found her. She hid among the people. She whispered the truth to those who hungered for peace. She taught them the song of hope. She passed the book from hand to hand. The nightmare could not be killed because it was never about fear. It was about courage. It was about the choice to believe in something more. The last words of Father Elias echoed in every corner of the universe. You feared what you could not control. Now you will face what you cannot kill. Hope. And in the darkness of broken worlds, the golden light of hope shone brighter than any weapon. The nightmare had become a dream no power could ever destroy.